The Nevada sky had turned an unnatural shade of red. Smoke hung heavy in the air, coating the lungs of every living creature with invisible fear. Trees crackled in the distance, and ash rained down in soft flakes, ghostly and silent, like snow from a world on fire. Emily Morgan tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she guided the battered rescue truck up the mountain road. At 35, she had spent most of her adult life pulling wild Mustangs out of impossible situations: drought zones, auction houses, abandonment. But this call was different. A ranger had reported a pregnant mare trapped in a box canyon, separated from her herd during the wildfire. It wasn't just a race against flames, it was a race against birth. "We're close," Emily said, glancing at her assistant, Jason, who sat beside her, eyes scanning the smoke-drenched ridges. When they reached the canyon's edge, Emily's breath caught. The mare was there, just as described, pressed against a stone wall, her flanks heaving. She was foaling, right there in the ash. "She's in labor," Emily said, voice low but urgent. "We can't move her now, not like this." Jason nodded and grabbed the emergency kit. For the next hour, they knelt beside the mare, whispering calm words, wiping her face with damp cloths, shielding her from smoke. The foal emerged in a blur of motion and blood, a tiny trembling colt with a white star marking his forehead. He blinked into the world, legs like stilts, body slick with amniotic fluid, chest shuddering. But there was no time to celebrate. Helicopters passed overhead, dropping water on the encroaching flames. The fire had shifted direction. "We need to get out of here, now!" Jason called, already packing the gear. Emily nodded, snapping a lead rope onto the mare's halter. But as she tugged gently, the mare stumbled. Her knees buckled. Emily dropped to her side. "She's not going to make it," Jason whispered, horrified. The mare let out a long, rattling breath and was gone. The colt let out a high-pitched, desperate whinny and collapsed beside her, as if trying to wake her with his trembling body. Emily's eyes blurred with tears, but she moved quickly. She wrapped the foal in a horse blanket, cradled him like a child, and carried him through the falling ash back to the truck. Silver Ridge Sanctuary was a modest operation in the Sierra foothills. 3 barns, 6 paddocks, and a dozen rescued Mustangs. But it had heart, and more importantly, it had Emily. That night, as the wind howled through the eaves and smoke still hung like ghosts in the valley, Emily sat beside the foal in the barn's quarantine stall. He was weak, so weak. His body trembled with every breath. "We'll bottle feed him every 2 hours," she told the volunteers. "He has a chance." "What's his name?" Jason asked. Emily looked at the tiny body tucked beneath the blankets. "Blaze," she said. "Born from fire. He's going to survive. He has to." She dozed off on the hay beside him, one hand resting on his withers. Just past midnight, a soft whine pulled her from sleep. Scout. Her 3-year-old border collie had slipped into the stall, tail low, eyes alert. Emily opened her mouth to scold him, but stopped. Scout crept forward, nose to the blanket, and gently licked Blaze's face. The colt stirred, leaning into the touch. His rapid breathing slowed. His ears flicked. "He recognizes comfort," Emily whispered, stunned. Scout lay beside Blaze, his body curled protectively around the colt. Blaze nuzzled closer, tucking his face into the dog's chest. It was a sight Emily had never seen before. It defied nature, it defied logic, but it made perfect sense. From that moment forward, they were never apart. Blaze grew quickly, too quickly, some might say. By the time he was 6 months old, his legs had strengthened, his muscles thickened, and his coat had transformed from a dull, sooty brown to a shining auburn flame. But more remarkable than his body was his mind. Every morning, Scout would race out of the farmhouse, down the gravel path, and leap against the gate of Blaze's paddock. The young stallion would whinny, not like a horse, but in a high-pitched, half-bark sound that sent the sanctuary volunteers into fits of laughter. "They've invented their own language," Jason once said, shaking his head in amazement. It wasn't just play. Scout taught Blaze to fetch. Well, sort of. Blaze would watch Scout pick up a stick, race across the pasture, and drop it at Emily's feet. Then the Mustang would grab the same stick, trot halfway, and drop it wherever he pleased, tail flicking with pride. He also followed Scout's herding cues. When Emily called out commands, Blaze moved, not like a horse responding to pressure, but like a dog anticipating structure and discipline. It was uncanny. No one had ever seen anything like it. Dr. Bennett, the sanctuary's vet, visited for a routine checkup. "They're mimicking each other," she said. "It's not imitation. It's symbiosis. This isn't companionship. It's co-regulation." At night, they curled together in the same stall. Blaze would lower his long neck protectively over Scout, and the border collie would rest his chin on the horse's leg. Their breathing synchronized within minutes. "They dreamed together," Emily whispered once, watching through the stall door. By the time Blaze turned 3, he was no longer the shaky-legged colt they'd rescued from the fire. He was a magnificent creature, tall, proud, with a wild mane and eyes that glowed with intelligence. But the dog in him never faded. He still barked, still fetched, still raced beside Scout instead of other horses. But nature has its rhythms. Emily knew Blaze needed to learn what it meant to be part of a herd. She introduced him to a group of rescued Mustangs. It was a disaster. Blaze stood at the fence line, calling for Scout. When he wasn't answered, he panicked, running, spinning, even trying to leap the enclosure. The older Mustangs regarded him with suspicion. Some pinned their ears. Others simply ignored him. "He doesn't know he's a horse," Emily muttered to herself. "He thinks he's part of a pack." She tried again, and again. Each attempt ended in panic. Scout, meanwhile, grew tense during the separation attempts, pacing the fence line, whining, scratching at the gate. "I'm not doing it again," Emily said finally. "They're not meant to be apart." She remodeled one of the paddocks, added a dog door to the shelter, expanded the interior, padded the walls for safety. It became their sanctuary within the sanctuary. Then came the letter. Nathaniel Ward, a wealthy horse breeder and trainer from Kentucky, had heard of Blaze. Word had spread online. Videos of Blaze playing chase with a dog, responding to whistle commands, and even doing agility-like movements had gone viral. "This Mustang could change therapy," Ward wrote. "He's not just intelligent, he's empathetic. I'd like to visit." Emily was reluctant, but the sanctuary was struggling. Feed costs were rising. The barn roof needed repairs. Several Mustangs were still without sponsors. When Ward arrived, he stood by Blaze's paddock, silent for nearly half an hour. "He's extraordinary," he finally said. "I've trained horses my whole life. I've never seen anything like him." Ward offered a sum Emily couldn't refuse, a donation large enough to fund the sanctuary for 2 years, plus a lifetime of care for any horse Blaze had bonded with. The condition? Blaze would join Ward's equine-assisted therapy program in Kentucky. "He'll have space," and Ward assured her. "Best care money can buy, and we'll send updates weekly." Emily's heart sank. "They've never been apart," she whispered. "Not even one night." "Horses adapt," Ward said gently. "He'll adjust. It's people who struggle more." Emily spent 3 nights agonizing. Scout lay beside her, resting his head on her feet, unaware of the decision being shaped around him. The morning of departure was still and too quiet. Scout barked once, then twice before Blaze was haltered. The stallion resisted, tossing his head. "Easy," Emily said, rubbing his neck. "You'll be okay." Blaze stared at Scout, who stood frozen at the gate. Emily led him toward the trailer. Blaze hesitated. Scout gave a sharp bark. Blaze stepped forward. The door shut. The ramp lifted, and Scout began to howl. He ran alongside the trailer as far as the gate would let him, barking, whimpering, circling back to the empty paddock, and then to the driveway. Then he laid down and waited. In Kentucky, Blaze did not thrive. He ignored the lush pastures, refused the grain, walked the fence line day and night. He called, not in a whinny, but a strange, broken bark that sent shivers down the backs of the stable staff. "He doesn't want food," Nathaniel wrote. "He wants someone." Scout fared no better. At Silver Ridge, he stopped eating, stopped barking. He lay in Blaze's old stall for hours, tail unmoving, ears flat. Jason tried to lure him with toys. Emily slept beside him. Nothing worked. Weeks passed. The sanctuary felt quieter, empty somehow. Then one night the rain came. It came fast and violent. The creek behind the sanctuary swelled into a torrent. Power lines snapped. The lower paddocks flooded. Horses were evacuated to higher ground, and in the chaos, Scout disappeared. Before the day of separation, life at Silver Ridge ran on the unspoken rhythm of Blaze and Scout. Every morning began the same. At the first light of dawn, Scout would spring from the back porch with a bark that echoed across the valley. Blaze, already awake, would lift his head from the straw and whinny back, a strange half-bark, half-nicker that no one else could imitate. Emily often stood at her kitchen window, sipping coffee, watching the unlikely pair gallop through the paddock. Scout would dart between Blaze's legs, then pivot with the grace of a dancer. Blaze, much larger, but somehow just as nimble, would leap and spin, tossing his head like a dog shaking off rain. They grazed side by side, drank from the same trough, and even played hide and seek, Scout disappearing behind hay bales, and Blaze sniffing him out, snorting like a bloodhound. It was not just friendship, it was identity. Emily began to notice little things. When Scout sat, Blaze would fold his front legs beneath him. When Scout rolled onto his back in the dirt, Blaze would follow, legs flailing in the air. "He thinks he's a dog," Jason laughed once. "He thinks Scout is his mother, his brother, his world," Emily replied quietly. The decision to send Blaze away grew heavier with each day. Emily spent long nights in the barn, watching Scout and Blaze sleep like puzzle pieces, one curled, one wrapped protectively around the other. She wondered what would happen to that shape when one was gone. She wasn't sleeping. The sanctuary's accounts weighed on her desk, red ink bleeding across every page. Feed bills, vet bills, repairs, more horses on the waiting list than stalls available. Nathaniel Ward's offer echoed in her head. A state-of-the-art facility, customized training, financial security for the entire sanctuary. And still, her chest ached. She tried separating them in short sessions, 10 minutes apart, then 20, then an hour. The result was always the same. Blaze would pace in frantic circles, calling and sweating, eyes wild. Scout would sit stiff at the gate, unmoving, ears pinned back, vibrating with restrained panic. Even the birds seemed to stop singing on those days. The trailer arrived at sunrise. Nathaniel sent his best handlers. They wore soft leather gloves and murmured calming words. But the air buzzed with tension. Scout stood on the porch, unmoving. Blaze was hesitant at the gate, eyes darting to Emily, then to Scout. Emily placed a hand on his neck. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're brave. We're so proud of you." Blaze blew a gust of hot air from his nostrils and stepped forward. One step, then another, until he reached the ramp. Then he stopped. Scout barked, one short, commanding bark. It was the same bark he used when teaching Blaze to follow, to chase, to trust. Blaze stepped in. The trailer door closed. The latch clanked shut. A chain rattled. Scout let out a single high-pitched howl. Emily turned away before the tears betrayed her. In Kentucky, the world was wrong. The grass was greener, the barns newer, the air cleaner. But to Blaze, everything felt like absence. He didn't recognize the scent of the hay. The birds chirped in strange tones. The wind carried no memory of ash or pine or laughter. He pressed his face into the wood slats of the stall and let out a low, vibrating sound that confused the handlers. It was not a whinny, not a scream. It was a bark. He refused grain, ignored water. When led to pasture, he stood motionless, head down, ears limp. Ward's staff tried soothing music, soothing scents, gentle brushes, and therapy animals. But Blaze wanted none of it. He was looking for someone who was missing. Back at Silver Ridge, Scout sat for hours outside Blaze's empty stall. The volunteers tried everything. His favorite toy, Emily's home-cooked eggs, even a visit from Dr. Bennett. But Scout ate less and less each day. One afternoon, Jason found him lying in the paddock alone, paws tucked, eyes distant. He didn't look up until Emily whispered, "He's coming home." I promise she didn't know if it was true, but she had to believe it. He didn't look up until Emily whispered, "He's coming home." I promise she didn't know if it was true, but she had to believe it. Scout's ears twitched slightly at the sound of her voice, but his eyes remained fixed on the empty stall ahead. Dust had begun to settle on the gate latch. The blanket Blaze used to sleep on remained untouched, still carrying the faint scent of hay and horse sweat. of comfort, of belonging. That night, Scout paced restlessly. He returned to each of their old spots: the patch of earth behind the feed shed where they had wrestled, the cracked water trough where they'd shared long summer drinks, the back of the field where Blaze had once barked back at coyotes. But none of it felt alive anymore. When he curled up on the porch, he turned his back to the barn. Emily found herself avoiding the paddock. She buried herself in chores, scrubbing troughs that didn't need cleaning, organizing tack boxes by color, counting inventory that hadn't changed. Guilt clung to her like the smoke once had in her lungs. Each email update from Kentucky brought little comfort. They were clinical, measured, padded with reassurances. Blaze is showing signs of stable behavior. Still pacing, but vitals are steady. Feeding remains inconsistent. Please advise on former preferences. Preferences? He had none. Blaze only wanted Scout, and Emily had taken him away. She reread Nathaniel Ward's messages late at night, searching for hidden signs of hope. He stands facing west every evening. He lets out a noise unlike anything I've heard. It doesn't sound like any horse I know. He isn't interested in other animals. He wasn't interested in the world. In Kentucky, the weather was temperate, the skies open. Birds chirped cheerfully and the air smelled faintly of clover. But Blaze stood in silence. He no longer called out. He no longer barked. Instead, he waited. At the farthest edge of his enclosure was a single oak tree. Beneath it, Blaze would spend hours, ears pricked toward nothing, tail still, nose twitching for a scent that never came. Handlers left fresh hay. He ignored it. They led therapy horses by for interaction. Blaze turned away. Nathaniel tried walking him through open pasture. Blaze would walk, precisely 20 steps, then stop. His eyes always turned west. He had begun refusing to sleep inside. Instead, he rested under the stars, curled slightly, mimicking the posture Scout had always taken beside him. He had forgotten how to rest without a heartbeat beside his own. Then came the storm, a distant rumble in the west, a low pressure that made Blaze lift his head. The wind carried something untraceable, but not unfamiliar. It wasn't a sound, it wasn't a smell, it was an ache. The ache of knowing that somewhere, someone you love is not safe. That night, Blaze paced nonstop. He didn't eat. He didn't lie down. He didn't blink. Just walked, round and round and round the far edge of the paddock, snorting, tossing his head, pawing the ground. The next morning, staff found claw marks on the stall door. Not from a dog, from hooves. He had tried to get out, not to run, not to escape, to go, to return, to someone. That night, the sanctuary in Nevada was silent, save for the slow, steady drumming of distant thunder. A storm was rolling in from the mountains, its dark belly churning above the tree line. The power had been out for hours. Candles flickered in Emily's kitchen, casting long, shaky shadows on the floor. Scout lay by the door. He hadn't moved in hours, but his eyes remained open. Emily watched him from across the room, a warm mug held between cold hands. The tea had long since gone cold. "Where are you, Blaze?" she whispered. Scout's ears twitched. He lifted his head slightly, not at the sound of his name, but as if hearing something else. Something Emily couldn't. She leaned forward. "You okay, boy?" But Scout didn't look at her. His nose flared once, then twice. His head tilted toward the west-facing window. The wind had shifted. It carried rain and something else. Scout stood slowly and walked to Blaze's empty stall. He didn't lie down. He stood in the corner, looking at the space where Blaze used to sleep, and let out a single low whine, so quiet that it barely stirred the air. Then, with hesitant steps, he turned and walked out into the night. Emily, still seated at the kitchen table, felt something stir in her chest. A strange ache bloomed behind her ribs, a hollow that opened suddenly, like a door left ajar. She stood and looked outside. Scout was gone. Thousands of miles away, Blaze stood under the same sky. He could feel it. It wasn't a sound or a scent or a vibration. It was Scout. Something had happened. Something was wrong. He pawed the ground, tossed his head, walked the fence line in slow, deliberate steps. His breath came fast. His chest rose and fell like a horse who'd run a mile, though he hadn't moved more than 10 feet. Then he stopped. He turned toward the west, toward the direction that made no rational sense, and stared. Behind him, lights flickered in the main barn. A groom stepped out with a halter in hand, but Blaze didn't notice. The storm clouds cracked open above. Rain began to fall, first gently, then with insistence. Blaze exhaled, a long, slow breath that came from somewhere older than instinct. And then he moved, not in panic, not in flight, but with absolute purpose. He galloped to the fence, cleared it in a single wild leap, higher than any trainer had ever asked of him, and vanished into the darkness. Blaze didn't look back. He ran, not in fear, but with a purpose etched into every stride. Storm winds slapped against his coat, thunder rolled above him, but the young stallion moved like a ghost through the Kentucky night. He avoided roads, weaving through forests and fields, following no map but something older, something felt. The staff at Nathaniel Ward's facility searched for him for days. Dogs, helicopters, flyers. Nothing. "It's like he vanished," Ward said over the phone, baffled. "We've had horses escape before, but never like this. Not one that disappears completely." Emily, upon hearing the news, dropped the phone. "He's coming home," she whispered. The first sighting came 3 days later in western Kentucky. A lone Mustang crossing a pasture at dawn. Then another in southern Indiana, then Illinois. Always alone, always heading west. "He's avoiding cities," said one tracker. "He's traveling with intention." Volunteers across the country rallied to Blaze's journey. They set out water troughs, left hay bales beside fences, posted photos online. "Watch for a Mustang with a white star on his forehead, traveling west." Emily's phone rang constantly with updates. "He's near the Mississippi. He crossed a river outside St. Louis. He's eating but won't stop moving." Meanwhile, at Silver Ridge, chaos had given way to heartbreak. Scout had vanished during the flood. Search teams scoured the creek bed, woods, ravines. Days turned into weeks. No sign. Emily placed his favorite toy by the back door. It remained untouched. "I think he's gone," Jason said softly one night. Emily didn't answer. She sat by the empty stall, hands clasped, listening to the wind. Then 24 days after Blaze's escape, a hiker in eastern Nevada reported seeing a wild-looking horse with a white star drinking from a stream. "He looked exhausted," she said, "but he kept moving." Emily drove through the night. Blaze arrived at dawn. She spotted him on a ridge just 5 miles from the sanctuary, leaner, dirtier, but unmistakably him. "Blaze!" Emily called. The stallion lifted his head, ears pricked, eyes alert. Then he turned away. "He's not coming home," Jason said behind her. "He's still looking." Blaze trotted east, toward the creek. Emily followed, breath caught in her chest. He led her to a place where the earth had broken, a deep ravine carved by floodwaters. The walls were steep, lined with loose rock and moss. Blaze paced the edge, calling out with increasing urgency. Then from below, a bark, weak, hoarse, but alive. Emily dropped to her knees. "Scout," she gasped. 20 feet below, wedged on a narrow ledge, lay the border collie, thin, shivering, but breathing. His eyes met Blaze's. His tail gave a small, trembling wag. Rescue crews arrived within the hour, but the terrain was too dangerous. The ledge was unstable. A helicopter wouldn't arrive in time. "He won't last much longer," the medic warned. Blaze, agitated, walked back and forth at the ravine's edge, testing the soil with his hooves. "He wants to help," Jason said. "Don't be ridiculous," one rescuer muttered. "He's just a horse." "No," Emily said, eyes full. "He's not." They fashioned a lightweight rope harness around Blaze's chest. A rescuer clipped in on the other end. Blaze would be the anchor. "Stand, Blaze," Emily said in a firm voice, the same tone Scout used in training games. Blaze braced, legs locked, head low. The rescuer descended. The line jerked, rocks tumbled, but Blaze held. Scout was lifted into the sling, cradled gently. As they rose, Blaze adjusted, stepping backward on command. Muscles tight, gaze locked on the edge. When Scout finally cleared the rim, Blaze let out a sound no one had ever heard before. A cry that was part whinny, part bark, and all emotion. Scout whimpered weakly. Only when the vet gave the nod did Blaze approach, lowering his muzzle, touching it to Scout's face, and standing perfectly still. Brother to brother. 3 months later, the sanctuary buzzed with visitors, reporters, and researchers. Silver Ridge was opening a new habitat, the Brothers' Haven, a custom-built, 10-acre space made for two. Half was paddock, half agility park, shade trees, custom shelters, a heated sleeping area with dual entrances. It was designed with their unique bond in mind. Scout had healed, slowly. Blaze never left his side. Nathaniel Ward stood in the crowd, humbled. "I've trained hundreds of horses," he said, "but Blaze and Scout, they taught me. That love doesn't recognize species. That home is not a place. It's a heart." As Emily opened the gate, Blaze stepped inside first. Scout followed close behind. The crowd held its breath as the two explored, moving in perfect rhythm. Blaze nuzzled the hay. Scout sniffed the water basin. Then, in a moment as natural as breathing, they came together. Scout licked Blaze's muzzle. Blaze dropped his head and curled his neck around his brother. They settled into the straw, shoulder to shoulder, chest to chest, just as they had their very first night. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.